that made my worst days seem like a breeze. The problem was, no one could know about us. Or, more specifically, Axel couldn't know. It wasn't because I was ashamed of her. No way. She was amazing, and honestly, I didn't think I could do better even if I tried. But Axel was complicated. You see, Axel is my nephew, but we're more like brothers. There's only about a 3-year gap between us, and we've been close since forever. We grew up in the same house, played video games together, and even got in trouble together. There was never any real rivalry between us. Not until Jill. Axel was obsessed with her, and by obsessed, I mean he would talk about her nonstop. It was one of those crushes where he could never shut up about how cool she was. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone has crushes, right? But things changed after I got to know Jill on my own terms. We had chemistry. Not the high school kind where you're awkward and giggly, but the real kind where everything just feels right. That's when the problems started. I remember the first time Jill and I kissed. We were at a friend's party. It was one of those chill nights where nothing crazy was happening, just a few drinks, some loud music, and a group of people hanging out. Axel was there too, but he was distracted, off with a group of guys talking about something, probably video games or some dumb prank he was planning. Meanwhile, Jill and I ended up on the porch outside, talking. We'd always had these long conversations, but that night something just clicked between us. She was leaning in close, her eyes locked on mine, and suddenly it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. We kissed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even something I thought would happen. But the moment it did, I knew there was no going back. That's where the secret began. We couldn't tell Axel. I know it sounds stupid, but I didn't want to hurt him. His crush on Jill was something he'd held onto for years, and as much as I hated to admit it, he kind of saw her as his future girlfriend. They weren't dating or anything, but Axel was convinced she was the one for him. I didn't have the heart to break that illusion. So Jill and I kept things quiet. Real quiet. We only met when we knew Axel wouldn't be around, like when he was out of town or busy with classes. Jill lived pretty close to campus, and Axel was often off doing his own thing, so it wasn't that hard to avoid him. But I knew it couldn't last forever. Nothing that good ever does, right? One weekend, Axel went away to visit some friends out of town. It was the perfect opportunity for Jill and me to have some actual alone time. I remember being stupidly excited. We hadn't spent a real weekend together in ages, and the idea of just hanging out, binge-watching shows, and maybe grabbing some food sounded like heaven. She came over Friday night, and everything was perfect. We ordered pizza, watched a couple of movies, and just relaxed. By the time it was midnight, we were both ready to call it a night. I couldn't help but feel a little bit of relief that we could finally be ourselves, without sneaking around. But life has this weird way of messing things up just when you think everything's going great. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a door slamming. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard voices. And one of those voices was Axel's. Panic hit me like a truck. I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. Jill was still half asleep, completely unaware of what was happening. I grabbed my phone, checking the time. It was barely 8 a.m. Axel wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday. What the hell was he doing here? I rushed out of the bedroom, praying that he hadn't seen anything yet. But as soon as I stepped into the hallway, there he was. Axel, standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at me with this look on his face that I'll never forget. It was a mix of shock, anger, and something else I couldn't quite place. James? His voice was cold, sharper than I'd ever heard it. What's Jill doing here? My brain went blank. I couldn't think of a single excuse that made sense. Axel wasn't stupid. He knew something was up. I could see it in his eyes. Before I could answer, Jill appeared behind me, still in her pajamas, looking just as confused as I felt. That's when it all clicked for Axel. His face twisted in anger, and for a second, I thought he might actually punch me. "You've been seeing her behind my back?" he yelled, his voice echoing through the house. How long, James? How long have you been doing this? I tried to calm him down. I really did. But there was no reasoning with him. Axel was livid. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. From his perspective, I was the guy who had swooped in and stolen the girl he'd been dreaming about for years. He probably felt like I'd betrayed him, and maybe in a way, I had. Axel, it's not like that, I started, but he cut me off. Not like what? You've been dating her this whole time and didn't tell me? He turned to Jill, his eyes wild with frustration. Did you even care that I liked you? Or were you just stringing me along while you were sneaking around with him? Jill looked hurt, but she didn't back down. Axel, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you, but I don't see you that way. I've always seen you as a friend. Axel's face flushed red with anger, and I could see that her words were like a punch to the gut. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, fists clenched. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he said, I'm going to make you regret this, James. You don't get to just steal her from me and walk away like nothing happened. I wasn't exactly sure what Axel meant by that, but I had a feeling it wasn't good. Axel wasn't violent by nature, but when he got angry, he could be unpredictable. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, leaving me and Jill standing there in stunned silence. That could have gone better, Jill muttered, rubbing her temples. You think? I said, trying to make light of the situation, but inside, I was freaking out. Axel wasn't the type to let things go easily. He held on to grudges like no one else I knew. The next few days were tense. Axel didn't come home, and I barely heard from him. When he did text, it was short and cold. Jill and I kept our distance, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to lose her, but I also didn't want to make things worse between me and Axel. Then, one night, I got a message from Axel. I hope you're ready, it said. Because I'm not going to stop until you're out of the picture. At first, I wasn't sure how seriously to take Axel's threat. He could be dramatic, but this was different. I knew he was hurt, but I didn't think he would actually go out of his way to destroy me. That is, until I heard through mutual friends that he was telling people he was planning something big. Jill was worried. Maybe we should talk to him, she suggested one night. Clear the air, try to make him understand that we didn't mean to hurt him. But I knew Axel better than that. Talking wouldn't fix this. He was too deep in his feelings, too angry to listen. And that's when I remembered something. Something that I hadn't thought about in years. Back when Axel was in college, he had a bit of a wild streak. He'd party a lot, drink way too much, and get into all kinds of ridiculous situations. And there was one night in particular that stood out. I'd been there, sober enough to remember every detail, while Axel, well, he wasn't. I'd recorded some videos that night. Nothing too incriminating, but enough to be embarrassing if they ever got out. Axel had been pretty wasted, dancing on tables, shouting random things at the top of his lungs. He'd even tried to climb a statue in the middle of campus. It was funny at the time, but now, those videos felt like a lifeline. I didn't want to use them. Blackmailing my own nephew felt wrong on so many levels, but if he was serious about coming after me, I had to protect myself. It was a last resort, but it was there if I needed it. The next week was hell. Axel avoided me as much as he could, but I could feel his presence like a storm cloud hanging over everything. I knew something was coming, but I didn't know when or how. Every day, I was bracing myself for whatever he was planning. Jill and I still met up, but things weren't as relaxed as they used to be. We couldn't stop looking over our shoulders, wondering if Axel was watching or waiting. Jill felt guilty about the whole situation, and even though I kept telling her it wasn't her fault, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow to blame for Axel's anger. One night, we were sitting in my living room, binge-watching some crime show when I got a notification on my phone. I didn't think much of it at first, just a regular alert. But when I opened the message, my heart dropped. It was a group text, and Axel had sent it to half the people we knew. The message said, "Hey everyone, just thought you should know that James has been sneaking around behind my back, dating Jill. Some friend, right? Just wanted to make sure everyone knew what kind of person he really is. Attached to the message was a picture of me and Jill, taken outside her apartment. It wasn't a scandalous photo or anything, just the two of us standing close, but it was enough to prove what Axel was saying. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just between me and Axel anymore. He'd brought everyone else into it. I could already imagine the kind of drama this would stir up. What the hell? Jill gasped, grabbing my phone to see the message for herself. He sent this to everyone? Yeah, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Looks like he's going public. Jill sat back, shaking her head. This is bad, James. Really bad. I didn't have a response. Axel had taken the first shot, and I didn't know how to fight back. Part of me wanted to call him out, to confront him and try to make him see reason. But I knew it wouldn't work. He was too far gone. This wasn't just about a girl anymore. It was about pride, betrayal, and a whole mess of emotions that I couldn't untangle. The next few days were a nightmare. Everywhere I went, people were whispering. I'd catch bits and pieces of conversations, people talking about how I'd betrayed Axel, how I'd gone behind his back. It was like high school drama all over again, except this time, the stakes felt a lot higher. Some of my friends took Axel's side without even asking me for my version of the story. Others just kept their distance, not wanting to get involved in the mess. I felt like I was losing people left and right, all because Axel couldn't handle the fact that Jill and I were together. Jill, meanwhile, was getting her own share of backlash. People were calling her names, accusing her of leading Axel on, even though she'd never done anything of the sort. It wasn't fair, but that didn't stop people from talking. She was tough, though, tougher than I was, probably. She didn't let the gossip get to her, at least not on the surface. But I could see the cracks starting to form. One night, after a particularly rough day, Jill came over, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. We can't keep doing this, she said, the moment she walked through the door. I froze, my heart sinking. What do you mean? I mean this. Us. Axel. Everything. She sat down on the couch, burying her face in her hands. I thought we could handle it, but it's too much, James. The rumors, the drama, the looks people give me when I walk into a room. I can't take it anymore. I sat down beside her, feeling like the ground was falling out from beneath me. Are you saying you want to break up? She shook her head. No. I don't want to. But I don't know how to make this work anymore. Axel's not going to stop, and now everyone's involved. I don't know if I can handle it. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. We'll figure it out. I don't know how yet, but we will. I'm not letting Axel ruin this for us. She gave me a sad smile, but there was doubt in her eyes. I hope you're right. Things didn't get better after that. If anything, they got worse. Axel wasn't done. The group message had been his opening act, but he had more in store. I just didn't know what until it hit me. I was sitting in my car after a shift at work when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message from Axel, but from a mutual friend. The message was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. Dude, Axel's been showing some video around. You might want to talk to him before things get worse. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What video? What the hell was he up to now? I knew Axel had been trying to find a way to hurt me, but I never imagined he'd go this far. I needed to figure out what was going on before it spiraled out of control. So I did the only thing I could think of. I called Axel. He didn't pick up, of course. I wasn't surprised. But I left a message anyway. Axel, I don't know what you're planning, but it needs to stop. This isn't just about us anymore. You're dragging everyone into this, and it's not going to end well for anyone. Just call me back. Let's talk. I didn't expect a response. But a few hours later, my phone rang. I told you I wasn't done, James, Axel said, his voice cold and detached. You think you can just sneak around with Jill and not face any consequences? What video are you showing people, Axel? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, you'll find out soon enough, he replied, and then he hung up. I didn't have to wait long to find out what Axel had been talking about. The next day, one of my coworkers pulled me aside during lunch. Hey, man, have you seen this? He asked, handing me his phone. I looked at the screen, my heart pounding. It was a video, one of those leaked kind of videos that people pass around when they want to cause trouble. And there I was, in the middle of it. It was a clip from a few years ago, back when I was still in college. I'd been at a party, pretty drunk, and doing some stupid stuff. Nothing illegal or crazy, but embarrassing enough. I was stumbling around, slurring my words, and making a complete fool of myself. Axel must have gotten a hold of it somehow, and now he was using it to humiliate me. Where did you get this? I asked my coworker, my voice tight with anger. Someone sent it to me. It's going around, man. I thought you'd want to know. I clenched my fists, rage boiling up inside me. Axel had crossed a line. This wasn't just about Jill anymore. He was trying to ruin my reputation, and he didn't care who got hurt in the process. That night, I confronted him. I showed up at Axel's place, banging on the door until he answered. When he finally opened it, he looked annoyed, but not surprised. What do you want, James? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. You know exactly what I want, I snapped, shoving the phone in his face. What the hell is this, Axel? You think this is funny? Axel glanced at the video, then shrugged. You brought this on yourself. You're the one who betrayed me. I didn't betray you, I growled. Jill and I weren't trying to hurt you. We're just together. You can't keep punishing us for that. Axel's eyes narrowed. You think this is about Jill? It's not. This is about you, James. You took everything from me. You always have. I blinked, taken aback. What are you talking about? Axel crossed his arms, his face darkening. You've always been the favorite. The one everyone looks up to. Mom, Dad, even our friends. I've always been in your shadow. And now you're trying to take Jill, too? I stared at him, stunned. I had no idea he felt that way. Axel had always seemed so confident, so sure of himself. I never realized he'd been carrying all this resentment. Axel, I said, my voice softer now, I didn't know you felt like that. But this isn't the way to handle it. We're family. We should talk, not tear each other apart like this. For a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of regret, maybe. But then his expression hardened again. Talk, he scoffed. It's too late for that, James. I'm done talking. I didn't know what to do. Axel was too far gone. Every time I tried to reach out, he just pushed me further away. And now, with that video spreading like wildfire, I felt like I was losing control of everything. Jill was furious when she found out about the video. This has to stop, she said, pacing around my apartment. He's trying to ruin your life, James. We can't just let him get away with it. I know, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. But I don't know what to do anymore. He's not listening. Jill stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes serious. Then maybe it's time to fight back. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She hesitated for a moment, then said, what about those videos you have? The ones from his college days? You said they were embarrassing, right? My stomach twisted. I knew where she was going with this, and I didn't like it. Jill, I don't want to stoop to his level. Why not? She snapped. He's not giving you a choice. He's already dragged you through the mud. If you don't fight back, he's going to keep coming after you. I shook my head. I don't know. Blackmailing Axel feels wrong, no matter what he's done. Jill sighed, frustration clear in her voice. Then what's your plan? Just let him destroy you? I didn't have an answer. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Axel wasn't going to stop, but I didn't want to escalate things any further. But as the days went on, and the video continued to spread, I started to wonder if Jill was right. After a week of constant stress, I finally made my decision. I couldn't let Axel ruin my life. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I didn't see any other option. One night, I sat down at my computer and pulled up the old videos of Axel. They weren't as bad as what he'd done to me, but they were still embarrassing enough to make him think twice about messing with me again. I hesitated for a long time before hitting send. My finger hovered over the mouse, my stomach churning. But then I thought about everything Axel had done, the public shaming, the threats, the humiliation. And with a deep breath, I clicked the button. The video was out there now. There was no turning back. It didn't take long for the video to start circulating. Within a day, I started getting messages from people who had seen it. Some were laughing, others just shocked. Axel's college antics were far worse than what I had remembered. In one clip, he was shirtless, standing on a table in the middle of a crowded bar, screaming out the lyrics to some random pop song while people cheered him on. In another, he was passed out on a bench, covered in marker drawings from head to toe, courtesy of his so-called friends. It was the kind of stuff that might have been funny back in the moment, but now, it was just humiliating. I didn't feel good about what I had done, but I hoped it would be enough to get Axel to back off. Maybe, just maybe, he'd realized that we were even now, that there was no point in dragging this out any further. But, of course, that's not how things worked out. The next morning, I woke up to an angry phone call. It wasn't from Axel, though. It was from my mom. "James, what the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp and full of worry. "What do you mean?" I asked, playing dumb, though I knew exactly what she was talking about. "Axel called me in tears last night. He said you're spreading some horrible video of him around. Is that true?" I closed my eyes, sighing. "Mom, it's not that simple." "James," she cut me off, her voice rising. "I don't care if it's simple or not. He's your nephew, your family. How could you do something like this?" "I didn't have a choice." I snapped, feeling my own anger rise. "He's been coming after me for weeks, trying to ruin my life. You don't know what he's been doing." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When my mom spoke again, her voice was softer, but still firm. "You're both acting like children. I don't care what Axel's done, this isn't the way to handle it. You need to fix this, James, before it gets even worse." I wanted to argue, to tell her that Axel had brought this on himself, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. My mom was right about one thing, this had gone too far. But now that the videos were out there, I wasn't sure how to put the genie back in the bottle. Axel didn't come home that day, or the next. In fact, I didn't hear from him at all for almost a week. At first, I thought maybe he was hiding out, too embarrassed to face the world after the video leaked. But then I started hearing rumors. One of our mutual friends told me Axel had been seen around town, hanging out with a new group of guys. I didn't know who they were, but from the sound of it, they weren't exactly the kind of crowd I'd expected Axel to fall in with. They were trouble, guys who'd been kicked out of college for various reasons, known for getting into fights and doing reckless, dangerous things. The kind of guys who liked to stir up chaos just for the fun of it. I tried not to think too much about it. Axel had always been a bit impulsive, but he wasn't stupid. He'd cool down eventually, I told myself. He'd realized that this whole mess wasn't worth losing everything over. But deep down, I had this gnawing feeling that something was about to go very wrong. That feeling hit its peak one night, a few days later, when I heard a loud banging on my front door. It was late, way too late for anyone to be coming by. My heart started racing as I made my way to the door, my mind jumping to all kinds of worst-case scenarios. When I opened the door, I was met with the last person I expected to see, Axel. He stood there, staring at me, his eyes bloodshot and wild. His clothes were disheveled, and he reeked of alcohol. Behind him, I could see a couple of his new friends hanging back by the curb, watching us with smirks on their faces. Axel, I began, but he cut me off. You think you're so smart, don't you? He slurred, his words barely coherent. You think you can just throw my life away like that? I shook my head, trying to stay calm. I didn't want to do this, Axel. You gave me no choice. No choice? He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You think you're the victim here, James? You took everything from me. You ruined my life. Axel, you need to calm down, I said, stepping out onto the porch. Let's talk about this. Calm down? His face twisted in anger. No, James. I'm done talking. I'm done with all of this. He took a step closer, and I could see the rage boiling just beneath the surface. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized how far gone he was. This wasn't the Axel I knew. This was someone else, someone who had been pushed to the edge. I didn't know what he was planning, but I had a feeling it wasn't good. And with his new friends egging him on, I wasn't sure how to stop him. I backed up a little, trying to put some space between us. Axel's friends were still standing by the curb, watching the scene unfold like it was some kind of sick entertainment. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to defuse the situation before it got any worse. Axel, I said, my voice as calm as I could manage, I know you're angry. And you have every right to be. But this isn't the way to solve things. You don't get it, do you? Axel spat, his eyes blazing with fury. You've already taken everything from me. Jill, my friends, my reputation. There's nothing left for me, James. Nothing. That's not true, I said, stepping closer to him. We can fix this. We can figure it out. You don't have to keep pushing everyone away. But Axel wasn't listening. His hands were trembling, and his breathing was ragged, like he was barely holding himself together. I could see it in his eyes, the desperation, the pain. He felt like his world had collapsed, and he was grasping for anything that might give him some control, even if it meant lashing out at me. I'll never forgive you, he muttered, more to himself than to me. You're dead to me, James. You and Jill. I'll make sure neither of you ever forgets what you did. I swallowed hard, trying to hide the fear creeping up my spine. Axel, please. This isn't worth it. Before I could say anything more, one of his friends stepped forward. He was a big guy, with a shaved head and a tattoo on his neck, and he looked like he was enjoying every second of this. Come on, Axel, the guy said, grinning. Let's show him what happens when you mess with us. My stomach dropped. This was about to get ugly. I could see the shift in Axel's face, the moment when he made the decision to go through with whatever twisted plan he had in mind. He was beyond reason, and his friends were only making things worse. Axel, I said, my voice shaking slightly, don't do something you'll regret. But it was too late. Axel's friend, the big guy with the tattoo, took another step toward me, his grin widening. He cracked his knuckles, clearly ready for a fight. I knew I couldn't take them both on. I wasn't a fighter, and even if I was, I wouldn't want to fight Axel. He was still family, even after everything he'd done. But these guys didn't care about that. They were looking for trouble, and they'd found it. Look, I said, backing up again, I don't want any problems. Just go home, and we can figure this out tomorrow. Axel didn't move. He just stood there, glaring at me with hatred in his eyes. Tomorrow, he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. There's no tomorrow, James. Not for you. Before I could react, the big guy lunged at me, grabbing my shirt and shoving me hard against the side of the house. My head slammed into the wall, and pain exploded behind my eyes. I struggled to get free, but he was too strong. He had me pinned. Axel just watched, a sick satisfaction playing across his face. Stop! I gasped, trying to push the guy off me, but it was no use. He punched me in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me, and I doubled over in pain. I could hear Axel's friends laughing, and I felt a wave of anger and humiliation wash over me. This wasn't just about Axel anymore. This was about survival. I don't know where I found the strength, but I managed to break free, shoving the guy away from me and stumbling back into the house. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. I could hear them pounding on the door, shouting threats, but I didn't care. I was done. I wasn't going to let them hurt me any more than they already had. I don't know how long I sat there, slumped against the door, my body aching from the blows. Eventually, the pounding stopped, and the shouting faded into the distance. Axel and his friends were gone. For now. I didn't know what to do. Calling the police felt like an extreme move, but I knew this wasn't over. Axel wasn't going to stop until he felt like he'd won, whatever that meant to him. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had gotten so out of hand. How had Axel, my nephew, the kid I grew up with, turned into this person who hated me so much? How had everything gone so wrong? Jill came over the next day, and when she saw the bruises, she freaked out. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice full of panic. "Axel," I said simply, not wanting to go into too much detail. "James, this has to stop," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "You need to get help. He's dangerous." "I know," I muttered, rubbing my sore ribs. "But I don't know what to do." "You can't keep letting him get away with this," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to do something." I nodded, but I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Axel's next move. The next few days were a blur. Axel didn't show up again, but I could feel his presence everywhere, in the whispers at work, in the tension that hung between me and Jill, in the constant fear that he'd show up at my door again with his new friends in tow. I knew Jill was right. I couldn't let this go on. But calling the cops? That felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready for. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I reached out to Axel. Again. I sent him a text, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd be willing to talk. "Axel, this has to stop. We need to fix this before someone gets hurt. Please, let's talk." I didn't expect a response. But to my surprise, a few hours later, he replied. "Meet me at the park tomorrow." Alone. The park Axel had mentioned was one we used to hang out in as kids. It was this small, quiet place with a worn-out basketball court and a couple of benches that were always covered in graffiti. It used to be our spot, a place where we go to escape, just the two of us, away from the world. When I arrived, I saw Axel sitting on one of those old benches, his head down, hands in his pockets. He looked like a shadow of the person I'd grown up with. His new friends were nowhere in sight, which was a relief, but the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I approached cautiously, not sure how to start. Part of me hoped this meeting could be a turning point, but another part of me knew Axel was too far gone for a simple talk to fix things. "You came," Axel said, not looking up. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but I could tell he'd been drinking again. The smell of alcohol lingered in the air. "Yeah," I replied, sitting down on the bench beside him. I kept a bit of distance between us, just in case. For a few moments, we sat in silence, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I didn't know where to start, so I waited for him to speak. "You know," Axel said after a while, his voice quiet, "I used to look up to you." That caught me off guard. I turned to him, but his gaze was still fixed on the ground. "I thought you had it all figured out," he continued, his words slurred but clear enough. "You were always the one who knew what to do. The one who got things right. And I was just the screw-up." "That's not true, Axel," I said softly. "You're not a screw-up. You're smart, you've got potential." "Potential?" He scoffed, finally looking up at me with bloodshot eyes. "What potential?" "I'm a mess, James. I've always been a mess." I didn't know what to say. I'd never seen Axel like this before. He'd always been so full of energy, so sure of himself, even when he was doing dumb stuff. But now, sitting here, he looked lost. Broken. This isn't about Jill, he said after a long pause. I mean, yeah, I liked her. I thought maybe. I don't know, maybe she'd be the one thing in my life that didn't feel like a failure. But it's not about her. It's about you. I frowned, trying to piece together what he was saying. About me? Axel sighed, leaning back on the bench. You've always had everything, James. The friends, the respect, the girl. And me? I'm just the guy who's always chasing after you, trying to be half as good. It's exhausting. You don't have to compete with me, Axel, I said, feeling a pang of guilt. I never wanted that. He laughed bitterly. Maybe not, but that's how it's always felt. Like no matter what I do, it's never enough. I'm always stuck in your shadow. I didn't know what to say. I'd never realized Axel felt this way. I thought we were close, maybe even like brothers. But the resentment had been building for years, right under my nose, and I'd been too blind to see it. I never wanted to hurt you, I said quietly. I didn't plan for things to go this way. Jill and we didn't mean to keep it from you, but we were afraid of what it would do to you. Yeah, well, you should have told me, Axel muttered, his voice thick with emotion. At least then I wouldn't have had to find out the way I did. We fell into silence again. I could feel the weight of everything we hadn't said hanging between us. I'm sorry, Axel, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. For everything. For keeping it from you, for making you feel like you were less. That was never my intention. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared off into the distance, his expression unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not yet. I nodded, understanding. That's okay. I don't expect you to. But I don't want this to keep going. We're family, Axel. I don't want to lose you. He clenched his jaw, and for a moment I thought he might explode again, but instead, he just shook his head. I don't know what to do, James, he said, sounding more defeated than angry. I'm so tired of all of this. The anger, the drinking, everything. Axel didn't have to spell it out for me. He was in pain, and that pain had driven him to make some pretty bad decisions. As much as I wanted to be angry at him, I couldn't. Not anymore. He was my nephew, and beneath all the rage, I could see the same kid I'd grown up with, the same kid who'd followed me around everywhere, wanting to be just like me. Maybe we can figure it out together, I suggested cautiously. You don't have to go through this alone. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether he could trust me. Eventually, he sighed and ran a hand through his messy hair. I don't know, man. I don't know if I can fix any of this. You don't have to fix it alone, I said. Look, I know things are screwed up between us right now, but that doesn't mean they have to stay that way. We can work on it, both of us. Axel didn't respond right away. He just sat there, staring at his hands like they held all the answers to the mess he was in. I wasn't sure what else to say. I didn't want to push him too hard, but I also didn't want to leave without at least some kind of resolution. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke. I'll think about it, he muttered, his voice barely audible. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. Over the next few days, I tried to keep my distance from Axel. I didn't want to crowd him or make him feel like I was forcing him into anything. Jill and I agreed to take things slow, too, not because we didn't want to be together, but because we both knew Axel needed space to process everything. But even though I was trying to be patient, part of me was anxious. I kept expecting the other shoe to drop, for Axel to snap again and go back to his old ways. But, surprisingly, that didn't happen. In fact, Axel stayed away from his new friends, and I didn't hear any more rumors about him causing trouble around town. One night, about a week after our conversation at the park, Axel texted me. Can we talk? I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed to meet him. This time, he wanted to come over to my place, which felt like a big step. When he arrived, he looked better than he had before, still tired, still worn down, but there was something different in his eyes. A flicker of hope, maybe. We sat down in the living room, awkwardly at first. The tension between us was still there, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been before. "I've been thinking," Axel began, staring at the floor. "About what you said. About fixing things." I stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "I don't know how to fix everything, but I'm willing to try. I just don't want to feel like this anymore, James. The anger, the jealousy, it's eating me alive." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I'm here for you, Axel. Whatever you need." He looked up at me, his expression raw and vulnerable. "I think I need help. Like, real help." That was the moment I knew things were going to change. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure how long it would take, but Axel was finally admitting he had a problem. And that was the first step toward healing. Axel started seeing a therapist a few days later. I helped him find someone who specialized in addiction and anger management, and he actually followed through with it. I wasn't sure if he would at first, but the fact that he was willing to put in the effort gave me hope. It wasn't an overnight transformation. Axel still had his bad days when he'd snap at me for no reason or shut himself off completely. But the difference was that he was trying. He wasn't letting the anger consume him like he had before. Jill and I kept our relationship quiet for a while longer, not because we were hiding, but out of respect for Axel. We didn't want to throw it in his face while he was still working through everything. He knew we were still together, but we all agreed to keep things low-key for the time being. Slowly but surely, the tension between us started to fade. Axel stopped seeing me as his enemy, and I stopped walking on eggshells around him. It was a long process, but we were making progress. One afternoon, Axel came over to my place, unannounced. He looked different, calmer, more at peace with himself. We sat down at the kitchen table, and after a few moments of awkward silence, he finally spoke. "I'm sorry, James," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "For everything. The threats, the fighting, all of it. I was in a bad place, and I took it out on you." I shook my head. "I get it, Axel. You were hurting." "That doesn't make it right," he insisted. "I screwed up, and I know that now. I hope we can move past it." I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my chest. "We already have." Things didn't go back to normal overnight, but they did get better. Axel kept going to therapy, and Jill and I slowly started integrating our relationship back into our lives. It wasn't easy, but with time, we found a balance that worked for all of us. Axel even apologized to Jill, which was a big step. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology in the world, but it was sincere, and Jill appreciated the effort. She forgave him, and from that point on, things between the three of us became less complicated. I never thought I'd say this, but I was proud of Axel. He'd come a long way from the angry, reckless guy he'd been just a few months ago. He was still figuring things out, still dealing with his own demons, but the difference was that now, he wasn't doing it alone. As for me and Jill, we were stronger than ever. Going through all of this had tested our relationship in ways I hadn't expected, but we came out the other side even more committed to each other. We didn't have to hide anymore, and that made everything feel more real, more solid. There were still moments when I thought back on everything that had happened, the fights, the videos, the threats. It all seemed like a lifetime ago, but the lessons I'd learned stayed with me. Family can be messy, complicated, and sometimes downright infuriating, but in the end, it's worth fighting for. Axel and I would never be the same as we were before, but maybe that was okay. We'd grown, both of us, and now we had the chance to rebuild our relationship on a stronger foundation. As the months passed, things started to settle into a new normal. Axel continued with his therapy, making slow but steady progress, and Jill and I continued our relationship out in the open. The drama that had consumed our lives for so long had finally faded, leaving room for healing and growth. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, and sometimes Axel would slip back into old habits, but the difference was that now he recognized when he was spiraling and made an effort to stop. He'd even started talking about going back to school, something I never thought I'd hear him say again. One evening, as we all sat together, me, Jill, and Axel, having dinner at my place, I realized how far we'd come. There was no more awkwardness, no more unspoken resentment. Just three people who had been through hell and back but had come out the other side stronger for it. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. I never thought we'd be here, Axel said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. He looked around the table, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Me neither, I admitted, chuckling softly. But I'm glad we are. Jill reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, her smile warm and full of love. Here's to moving forward, she said, raising her glass. Axel hesitated for a moment, then raised his own glass. To moving forward. As we clinked our glasses together, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It had been a long, hard road, but we'd made it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was going to be okay.